So in this podcast for the Light Review, we are joined by David Obel Rosenkvist. Is that right? Did I pronounce
It's good enough.
Chief Commercial and Creative Officer for Louis Poulsen. Welcome to the Light Review, David. I'm not quite sure what a Chief Commercial and Creative Officer is, but I'm sure you can explain to us at some point if you wanted to. What is a Chief Commercial and Creative? Are you on the design side? You're not, are you? Is it marketing, or what's your role at Louis Poulsen?
It's a little bit of both, and that's why the title. What we did was that I'm coming from the marketing and communication side of the business, but we, as a design company, merged the functions of both the product development, product design, and into the communication and marketing part in one team. And as there is with the design processes and the product design, there is a creative side to it, and there is definitely a commercial side to it.
When I think of Danish design, I would probably band it together under a Scandinavian Funkis style. Do you have your own particular take on this, or do Danes have their own style, or would you say that you could just sort of say Scandinavian design is, as you would say, the same as Danish design, like the Funkis style?
I think there is some references back to something that is Scandinavian, but I think when we are speaking design and the design tradition, it is very much a Danish tradition that is different from the Norwegian or the Swedish or the Finnish design traditions. I mean, if we're looking at the big movements of modernism or Funkis, it's global tendencies or European tendencies that has a Nordic twist to it. But specifically when we are speaking product design, furniture design, lighting design, there's a tradition that is very strongly developed and has a background in the Danish culture.
That's an excellent answer. That's interesting, because one thing that struck me because as you know, I work for Targetti Poulsen, not Louis Poulsen, but I was very happy to go to the Louis Poulsen site because I studied product design at university, and the names from Denmark are outstanding. I mean, the design ethic and everything else. So the thing that struck me when working for a Danish company was how process driven everything was, including each design story behind the product. I mean, that's a true interpretation, isn't it? I suppose. Would you say? Okay.
No, definitely, yeah. I think.
So does it ever stifle creativity or innovation? Because I was surprised to see such a correlation between also the products and the people themselves. They seem to reflect well on the people, just the whole Danish way of living, and which is quite nice to see. I think maybe that's just looking from afar, but would you say that that's true? Or there's two questions there, I guess.
Yeah, I'll try to answer it the best way I can. I think we're such a small country. We are 5-6 million inhabitants only. We have a very small geographical spread. We have a very little language that only this 5 or 6 million people speaks. Nobody else understands. So the influence that we have is always kind of like being influenced by much larger cultures or much larger tendencies in the world. I mean, if you look at it as the classicism and the modernism and the Funkis movements, these were not Danish movements. So everything that has come out of Danish tradition has been a filter or an interpretation of these global influences. And then I think something happened uniquely around the design in the 30s, 40s, and the golden eras of the 50s and 60s in Denmark, because it had a filter that was very much to do with Danish society, the way that we are building societies, both around the public sectors and around the private sectors and the focuses, that was really unique, and where we started to also in our education within space design and within product design to have some really strong characters and some guidelines that were put into guidelines and structures and beliefs and principles to follow in terms of ways of interpreting these influences that came from the Bauhaus movement, of the functionalism, that came from the classicism, and that came from all these tendencies, but that was developed in a way in the Danish culture because of the way our society works. And that is, you can say, a Scandinavian tendency. You can say that a lot is with the humans in the center, and that there is fairly wealthy societies where focus on quality and focus on things that will last has been had a lot of attention. So it's similar. I try to make a comparison often to what have happened within the Danish cuisine, for instance, in the last, 15, 20 years, where when I grew up, Danish cuisine, there was not such a thing. There was traditional Danish food, and believe me, it wasn't very sophisticated. It was boring, to say the least, and it was very traditional. But of course, we were influenced by the Italian food culture, the French cuisine, and also the Asian cuisine. And then we had some brilliant chefs that started to interpretate this into a Danish Nordic context of using local ingredients. So of course, local ingredients in Denmark interpreting these cuisines becomes something else. And that hit a perfect spark. And that's very similar to what happened in the 20s, 1920s in Denmark, in terms of interpreting with local craftsmanship, local materials, and local traditions into these isms that were happening at the moment. And that was something unique happening back then, as has been with the Danish cuisine within the last couple of decades.
And I must say, actually, having eaten at your restaurant is amazing. Sorry, I call it a restaurant, it's a cafe, but it's amazing, the food there. It is like eating in a restaurant. I thought to myself, how you don't go bust, because all this fine food that you offer your employees, a lot of fish, as you say.
Well, it changed since the experience you described there. This was back in the day where we were sharing offices or buildings with some very wealthy lawyers' offices as well. So this was a co-shared kitchen with some fancy lawyers' offices as well. So we benefited from that. I think there was a group of 4 or 5 companies, and they had, I'm being told, because it was before my time, that it was a brilliant cuisine being served for lunch at that time. We still have good lunch, but I believe not to the same extent or price level.
You've got designer budget lunch rather than lawyer budget lunch, probably. Yeah, because that is a different thing, definitely.
Yeah.
I think I had a friend, Carsten Schwesch, I pronounced his name incorrectly, in Copenhagen. And the thing I loved when I stayed with him was just the non-showy way that he dealt with his house. And it seemed to possess a natural fluidity that was timeless, which is, for me, the sign of great design. And I think you could say that a lot of the products that you have are timeless, aren't they? I mean, some things go back to the 1930s, but how do you respond to current trends in new technology and lighting, and how's that affecting the design aesthetic? Because obviously, I remember seeing the artichoke and all the Paul Henningsen drawings about how to protect glare and with a specific light lamp source, and then all of a sudden we've got LED, and then the lamps, all that sort of thing's got, and you're like, well, actually it looks really nice, so we just go with that. So how do you deal with that? The fact that the technology is moving on, and how do you innovate in that sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that when the LED technology started really to develop and being implemented, there was a fascination about how well it could function and how efficient it could be, and how great an output or powerful an output you could have for very little input. So the function about it, and the sustainability, and also economically, how easy you could transfer most of the energy into light instead of heat, and also the beliefs that this would be the way that the LEDs, the light sources themselves, would be without any need of any design around them, because it was just bringing light to spaces. And as this company that has represented the design and light development for a century, not a decade or decades, but a century, believing that it is the duality between the light source, and the design and the shading and direction of the light, reflection of the light around it, in an equal balance that would give, because of the functionality that was demanded, an aesthetic of the design that would come with it as well. As Poul Henningsen said, it's equally important that the light fixture, the design itself, is just as beautiful when it's turned off as it is when it's turned on. But you also see that there's something that is exactly as always has been, that the ambience and the drama, or the dynamic that will come in a space, comes between using different kind of light sources, different kind of light fixtures, preferably many of them, so that it can create not only light but also the light and the shadows, that you can have more dark places and light places, so that it would be comfortable to be just as being in nature. That it would be, of course, brilliant to be only on a blue sky and having the direct sun at 12 o'clock noon, but it's also when you have a bit of clouds and a bit of different colors and shadows from buildings, from trees, from nature, that gives all the nuances and all the drama or dynamics and ambience around you. And that's what still the light fixtures and the light sources and the combination of them is doing. And also, and that's what I find almost even more fascinating, or just as fascinating, is that all the experiments and what was considered scientific experiments that Poul Henningsen did back in 1924, 26, and in the 50s, when he did the artichoke and when he did the pH5 and so on, knowing that you could manipulate slightly by coloring the shades, having a bit more emphasis on the rose colors and the ambience that would give, and what it would do to the tint of people or the atmosphere in a space. All of that was done by the shades and the colors around it, and can now be done with the LEDs themselves, in the combination with the light fixture or the LEDs themselves. So I think Poul Henningsen would have loved to see this development with the LEDs. I mean, the last 3 or 4 years, when the LEDs really have started to have strong qualities within them as well, because it's a repetition of everything we believe in, that he believed in, and that we are basing our design principles on even today.
That makes complete sense. And actually, in this current climate, we're becoming more aware of our limited resources and overconsumption. So you can see how the functional style, I'll say Scandinavian style, even though obviously it covers everyone, but it has a place in this world, because I think to make a timeless product is the ideal solution for fighting overconsumption, isn't it? If you have something that lasts forever, then I bought the table lamp I have because I want it forever, not because I just want to chuck it away in a couple of years' time. How long can this style last, do you think? And what do you predict the future for your brand? Because if everyone goes down that route, then how do you differentiate yourself? That interests me, actually. that it does interest me. How do you think you're going to go in the future? How do you differentiate yourself?
I think that the differentiation is very much in the DNA, and also in the methodology, and in the persistent of not compromising on these ideals. Of course, it can be followed by others, it can be copied by others. Back in the days of Poul Henningsen, I've seen advertising campaigns about annoyment about being copied for the tree-shade principle that he developed and so on. So it has always been copied or be giving inspiration to others, which is fine. Inspiration is fine, copying is not. And of course, that comes to the quality of the materials and the products, and that's what always has been important, that the products within Louis Poulsen has been designed to be timeless, having timeless qualities. I mean, whether they will be timeless, whether they will be iconic, whether they will be in the market for 50 or almost 100 years, is depending on a lot of factors. Those timeless qualities are definitely the first and most important ones, but then there's a lot of factors around it that should be at place as well. But when you have that opportunity, you also are interested in that it should be graceful, or it should be aging with grace, or be beautiful and aged with beauty over the years, so that it will be a timeless design, along also with a timeless durability.
I think that's a great way to end. So I'm going to thank you for your time. Thank you very much. It's been great having you on, and hopefully the next batch of products from Louis Poulsen will last another 100 years.